This is a formal welcome to those of you who are brand new to Get Set Up, and also a welcome back to the many of you who've been attending a lot of classes. It's always so wonderful to see you returning to class. For those of you who are brand new, we are a training organization for seniors by seniors. So all of our guides are seniors. We've all done some other things in life, and we come to this for an opportunity, an economic opportunity, but also just to get out there and meet new people. We don't sell anything as an organization. So anything that I represent to you might show you products, or if I show you websites along the way, just know that those are things that we see that we think you'd be interested in, that we may be interested in and want to share. And there is no kind of relationship with the organization. We do record these sessions, and you can see that there is help at getsetup.io on the slide here. And you can copy that down. It's a great email address to have for the purpose of requesting the video, but also for the purpose of getting in touch if you have any kind of technical issues, any other problems with communicating with us, and especially for this next thing. Well, I shouldn't say especially. This is what's really important to me. I want to make sure that you get the email that I send out after the class, because that's going to have the recipes and notes that we talk about in the class today. So what good is it going to be if we go over these recipes for desserts and you don't have them to recreate? So you've got to have those. I will give you a word of warning that sometimes GetSetup's email address, if you haven't set it up in your contact file, will send, your system will send those emails directly into your junk mail. So if you don't see that email from me in your mailbox a few hours, at least within a few hours after the class, check your junk email. And if it's not in there, then definitely use that email address to get in touch. We'll want to know that and fix that for you. I do think that this is a forum for us to learn. You learn from me with what I've brought to this class with my research and practice and so on, but I learn as much from you because, let's face it, especially in terms of cooking, we all have lots of experience and have ideas and creative suggestions. So I invite you to unmute yourself as we go along and ask questions and also share your ideas. I will also be checking the chat. Does everyone have a sense of how to access the chat at the bottom of your screen if you're on the computer? Raise your hand if you have any issues with chat. We'll make sure we take care of that. And so I'll be checking the chat periodically. If you want to put something in there, I'll look into that. But please don't let your questions go unanswered. If I get enthusiastic about what I'm doing and I forget to check, then you need to let me know that I'm not addressing your needs. And I saw, Phyllis, that you had your hand raised. Yes.
Yeah. Is it different for the iPad as far as the chat?
Yes. Maybe check the top of your screen. And I see Judy nodding. Do you want to give her a tip on that, Judy?
Yes. If you tap the top, the black area on the top, there'll be a scroll down. And you'll see more with 3 dots in the right corner.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right, tap that and you'll see the word chat.
Yep.
And then you can type across the bottom and it says everyone. And if you tap on everyone, certain names will come up, you know, if you want to talk to the presenter or whatever.
Okay. And right now it's covering most of my screen. So do I just pull it up when I want to chat?
Yes, and then you have to hit the word close up in the top. You'll see the word close, and then you're back to the screen.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Judy. And you know, you've just beautifully demonstrated how we do things here. We help each other. We talk to each other. I think that's wonderful. So
I'm a retired teacher, so
good. Well, I need you in this class. That's wonderful. Thanks. So the last thing that I would say related to the chatting along the way is that at the end of your conversation online here, mute your mic. So Phyllis, go ahead and mute your mic when you're not speaking. And that's just because we get a lot of feedback and that can be disruptive, but I don't want that to stop you from unmuting yourself and talking. So just to get us, kind of started and warmed up today, I'm interested to know what brought you specifically. I know you came because you wanted to talk about desserts, but is there anything in particular that you had in mind that said, I'm going to sign up for that class?
Hi, this is Faye speaking.
Yes.
I'm interested in healthy desserts because I have a husband that has a wicked sweet tooth. He loves desserts, and I do too, actually. And I'm always looking for different ways to make a dessert, but try to avoid too much sugars or fats. And I have a lot of fruit that I work with because we have a garden and blueberry bushes and stuff. So I'm kind of hoping to find a little way around that.
Okay, well, that's really that's a good in-depth answer, and I appreciate that so much. And I can certainly relate because I have a husband with a sweet tooth like that too. So I think we're going to have some strategies to give you some ideas today. That's great.
May I go next? My name is Cora, and the reason I signed up for the class because I'm going to start taking a steroid tomorrow, and I understand it'll make me gain weight. So I'm trying to do some healthy desserts, and I'm trying to get ahead of the game and plan meals so that I won't gain weight while I'm taking the prednisone.
Okay, yeah, that's a good strategy. Getting ahead, well planned ahead. Wow, you're way ahead of the game with. I know what I'd be thinking after I put on the weight. What am I to do? So kudos to you for that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Oh, we'll just get started then with our agenda for today. I want to talk a little bit about what makes a dessert unhealthy. And I'm going to be asking you that question because in your, you have some characteristics, I think, in your mind that says to you, this is what makes dessert unhealthy the way I think. And then I'll share with you what I think. And we're going to talk about dietary guidelines so that you have an idea of what you're starting with. What is it that you should be looking at nutritionally in the profile of your desserts so you know whether they're healthy or whether they're unhealthy, and how you include a dessert in the scope of your entire day's worth of calories and nutritional requirements. So we'll take a quick look at that. The government puts out some pretty extensive dietary guidelines that are great. We're only going to look at a smidgen of that. Then we're going to talk about some specific strategies for making those desserts healthier, but also really tasty. So we're going to talk not just about lowering calories, but also adding nutritional content here. It's not just about making them less bad, it's about making them better. And then we're going to look at some specific recipes. So with that, I think I'd like you to put in the chat just for each other's benefit, and then I'll take a look in the chat as well. What's your favorite dessert? And while you're doing that, you can also be thinking about what makes dessert unhealthy. And that you can just unmute yourself and just shout out what makes dessert unhealthy. Okay. Oh, Carol Lee, you've lost your sense of taste. Is that a permanent thing, or is that a COVID related thing? Or you could unmute yourself, Carol Lee, if you'd like. I see cheesecake. We've got something in there for the cheesecake lovers, something in this class. Chocolate chip cookies, anything with chocolate. Boy, I get lots of that chocolate. Pie. What's your favorite pie, Edwina? You can unmute yourself. Cheesecake, banana bread, ice cream, anything chocolate. Okay.
I like pumpkin.
You like pumpkin? Okay.
Pumpkin.
Pumpkin cheesecake. Really? It's like you're giving me a perfect segue into one of my recipes. So we'll come back to that. All right. And so now I'm looking at some of the health concerns, what makes dessert unhealthy. And I see excess sugar and saturated fat, anything sugar and some fats. Okay. Yeah. All right. And here's what I would say makes a dessert unhealthy, a variety of things, including what you've said. And I also think that it's when there's too many calories. So just putting too much of something into a dessert recipe. And having too large a serving size goes hand in hand with too many calories. You know, we have gotten so accustomed to these large servings that we get in restaurants. And now we're supersized everything. So some of what we're looking at today is going to be serving size. Some of the recipes that I give you are going to point to a smaller tidbit of something. And that's okay, because we can have more dessert if we think about eating a small portion of something each night. It's just kind of rethinking the way that we approach our servings. And then from there, it's the too much sugar that we get in our diet, way too much sugar, too much of the wrong kinds of fats, and even too much fat, period, because we know that too much fat puts more weight on us. There's actually 9 grams of fat in 9 calories in a gram of fat, compared to 4 calories in a gram of carbohydrate. So fats are actually more fattening. So that's something to keep in mind. And then finally, too much refined white flour. And this will provide not only more calories in your dessert, but also more empty calories. So refined flour, white flour, is not nutritious at all. So we're going to be looking at how we can replace that with something that's actually nutritious for us. So let's take a look at these dietary guidelines. As I mentioned, the government puts out guidelines. Every 5 years, they put this big book out. And I've extracted these guidelines from that booklet. And we're going to look at 2 out of the 3 what are called macronutrients that we are supposed to be getting in our diet each day. That's fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. We're just going to deal with the fats and the carbohydrates. And for this group, the GetSetup demographic, 51 and older, we're looking at an average calorie intake per day of 1,600 for women and 2,000 for men. Now, that's average, so none of us are average. Some of us will be able to consume more, some less, and of course the scale tells us about that. And from that 1,600 or 2,000 calorie diet, we should be getting 20 to 35% of our daily calories in fats. So we do need fat. It's important to us. But as somebody said in the chat, it's those good fats that are important to us. And we should be restricting the amount of saturated fat that we get. Now, where do we get saturated fat from? In a dessert especially, where does the saturated fat come from? Anybody? You guys are quiet.
Lead.
Butter.
Butter. Okay, butter's a big one. Absolutely. So animal products are where we get fats from. So butter, lard. Remember, in the old days, it was lard. And then Crisco came along, and Crisco was bad because Crisco had a lot of trans fats. Now, I think they've reformulated that and they say 0 trans fats at this point. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing with it, but trans fats, I don't even have noted here. Please, though, note that trans fats should be totally eliminated from your diet. If you're out, and you usually find those in your packaged goods, baked goods and so on. They've done a great job of reducing those, but you'll want to flip the package over and check the nutritional contents. And if it says trans fats, just put it back on the shelf. So less than 23 grams of saturated fat per day. And we're going to look at the nutritional profile of these desserts. So you might just jot that number down, less than 23 grams, so that you can see how that compares with the nutritional profiles of the desserts. When it comes to carbohydrates, then we need 45 to 65% of our daily calories in carbohydrates. And now we're looking at the quality of the carbohydrate as well. So carbohydrates can be simple or they can be complex. Simple carbohydrates are things like table sugar and refined all-purpose flour. They have zero nutritional value. And they have another negative in that they come into our system, into our digestive system, and they are burned just like that very easily. And what happens when a simple sugar is digested in our system? What happens in our system?
Blood sugar increases.
Yes, our liver says, insulin, or pancreas, excuse me, says, insulin, we need insulin to digest this sugar. And then we've got this crazy sugar response and eventually maybe a point where we become insulin, well, they call it insulin resistant, right? Where our insulin isn't doing the job. So we're trying to reduce those simple carbohydrates and replace them with something that's called a complex carbohydrate, which means that it takes longer to break down and be digested. And then there's not nearly the insulin response. It's not all rushing out at one time to take care of that sugar. So in this case, we'd be looking at more whole grain things. Complex carbohydrates in our diet overall are usually associated with whole grains and with vegetables because vegetables have a lot of fiber in them. That's why they're so good for us. So they balance nutritional value and fiber and are slow to digest. And when it comes to added sugar, after we've taken care of all of our nutritional requirements for the day, and that is spelled out in those dietary guidelines that you're probably familiar with, we should be getting no more than if we're women, 25 grams or 6 teaspoons of added sugar in our diet, and men no more than 9 teaspoons of added sugar. So that's translates to 100 to 150 calories of sugar. So just to give that a sense of relativity there, how many teaspoons of sugar do you think are in a 20-ounce bottle of Coke? Is somebody
16. 16.
Absolutely. You've been listening, Tatiana. Tatiana's been to some of my other classes. 16 teaspoons. So think about that. You drink 1 bottle of Coca-Cola in a day, and you've already well exceeded your amount of sugar for the day. So you can be doing a whole lot for yourself just by eliminating soda from your diet. That's not the only reason to eliminate soda, but that's a big one. And think about what you might be able to put in its place with far fewer sugar calories when we talk about these healthier desserts. So
Deb?
Yes.
Debbie, can I ask you something?
Yep.
I have 2 questions. With the white flour, is it better if you're going to use white flour for baking, we'll say, is it better to use the unbleached organic flour? And the other question is, if you're drinking Coca-Cola and you get the diet Coca-Cola, it has some stuff in it. Is that just as bad for you?
Those are great questions, Faye. Thank you for asking those. I am a reformed soda drinker, so I've eliminated soda from my diet. Maybe once or twice a year, I will have a half a soda or something. But yes, I think that first of all, the sugar in it is bad, and then the other diet ingredients and the ingredients in total that are in soda are just not. They're all processed. They're all chemical. They're not good for us. There are a few sodas that will use a less bad sweetener in them. I stay away from any soda that has NutraSweet in it. NutraSweet has had a lot of research studies behind it that show it has neurotoxic qualities. So it's just better to stay away from that in its entirety. If I'm going to use anything, I look for something sweetened with, as we'll talk about later, sugar alcohols or something like sucralose, as a less bad kind of thing. And we do talk about that, using less bad ingredients. I do think that there are a lot of things out there that are processed that aren't necessarily the best for us, but if we're trying to gain a little bit of balance, sometimes we do make the decisions to include some of those things. I know that I do. I'm not a purist across the board. So I talk about less bad for us. Does that answer your question? What was the bleached flour, unbleached flour, definitely organic flour, definitely unbleached flour. And that's what we'll get into next here, talking a little bit more about what our strategies are now for making desserts more healthy. And it's all about decreasing amounts of bad things or replacing or finding substitutes for some of these things in their entirety. So since we're talking about flour, let's go there. Let's talk about using less all-purpose flour. And to your point, Faye, using a higher quality all-purpose flour if we're going to. And so, the bleaching idea is just better to be avoided. And when it comes to organic flour, what I understand from current research is that there are new strains of flour, of wheat grains that have been evolving over the years that can cause more of this grain sensitivity that we see happening a lot, this gluten intolerance thing. And there seems to be less of that when we're eating some of the older grains too, the heirloom grains. So that's not necessarily organic, but the heirloom grains are also, or the non-GMOs would also be a consideration. And when you're thinking about that, you can also think about what other kinds of whole grains you might include. So spelt is a grain that is a lighter type of grain that you can use to replace some or all of your all-purpose flour. Generally speaking, with a lot of the things that you make, you can replace up to half of your all-purpose flour without compromising the quality, the texture of the product that you're making. So that's a general statement, but it's a good rule of thumb. Questions about that? Thoughts about that?
What does it mean, heirloom?
These are the these are the heirloom are the original grains, the old grains, before they've been hybridized or crossed with other things and transformed into something different. So heirlooms are those ones that have been around and used in their form over many years.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So if I grow an heirloom seed, plant from an heirloom seed, it's going to come up in the same way with the same characteristics as it did 1,000 years ago. It's the same thing. But when we hybridize seeds, then if we try to plant a seed from a hybrid plant, what we may get is a plant that may revert back to one of its parent genes. So you can't grow the same plant from a hybrid seed, if that makes sense, without getting into gardening terminology too much at this point. So whole grain flour is a good substitute or good addition, replacement for all-purpose flour, and we can completely substitute for flour in some recipes by using black beans or avocados. Has anyone ever done this? Okay, I see some shaking heads yes and some no.
Yes, I have done it.
And what have you done that with, Faye?
Actually, brownies.
And actually, we're going to talk, was that black bean brownies or?
It was black bean, yes. I saw the recipe and I tried it. It was okay. It wasn't bad. It was nice and moist anyhow.
Mhm.
But I mean, if you have to stay away from flour, it's a great alternative, I think.
Very much so. So
Yeah.
somebody else has used black beans?
No, I haven't, but I want to know. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
How do you get whole black bean flour?
Well, you don't use black bean flour. You actually use the canned black beans. And your recipe will tell you. So the best thing, I'm going to give you, well, I don't have a black bean recipe today, but I do have an avocado recipe, and it's going to tell you how to use the avocado. But if you want to use black beans, you can Google recipes for using black beans in desserts, and you will get more ideas for that. But no, you're just using the canned beans. Don't worry about getting a flour. There's no special product.
Okay.
Do
And
you
what-
need to wash it or you can use with this liquid?
Can you say that again, Tatiana?
If you,
Yeah.
when you open a can, do you need to wash the beans or
Yes.
you have to, you can use with the liquid in it?
No, you want to rinse those beans.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, now what is that smelt light grain? What is that you were saying?
Spelt, it's S-P-E-L-T, and it's just, it's a form of grass grain that is an older grain that's been around for a while. Heritage grain is what they're called.
And you can buy it off the shelf?
Yes, you can. Now you might find that more so in your health food store or in a larger grocery store in the organic section. It's maybe not yet embraced as a mainstream kind of thing. So it might be a little harder to find. I don't know if the grocery stores sell enough of it that they stock a lot of it. So you can look for it in health food sections. Okay, so let's look then at fat. And what do we do with fat? Well, we use some lower fat versions of the things that we have, and we can substitute out as well. So low fat versions of things that are in some of our recipes would include low fat sour cream or low fat cream cheese, not low fat butter, because there's usually more water in that, and it'll change the texture of your recipe. So need to find another way to deal with the butter. But lower fat cottage cheese, all of those. And we're going to see some of that in the cheesecake version of a dessert that I have. And you can also substitute healthier fats as well. So you can think about using avocado oil, canola oil. You can always also use coconut oil. Now, coconut oil does have a bit of saturated fat. It does have saturated fat in it, but there is some controversy about whether that is really bad, because lots of folks have had really good lipid profiles as a result of using coconut oil. So their cholesterol hasn't really gone up or anything associated with that. So I would include coconut oil in a healthy diet. And then also you can use a complete fat substitute by using pureed fruits. So some of you have said you use applesauce in some of your baking. I'm seeing some nods there. Yeah, and you don't have to limit it to applesauce. You can see that you can also use pureed prunes, peaches, pumpkin, canned pumpkin, mashed banana. All of those can be fat substitutes. Now, I have some rule of thumb on that. There's two rules of thumb. Some recipes will go 1 for 1, and some will one part pureed fruit to replace 1 part of butter or fat. Other recipes may call for 1/2 to 1, half pureed fruit to 1 saturated fat. So it just depends on the recipe. And it also invites some experimentation on your part as the cook. If it doesn't work quite the way, or the texture isn't quite what you wanted in the first go round, adjust the recipe a little bit and see whether you like it. I would say don't discard a recipe the first time without giving it a little bit of a tweak, because we are all learning as we go along here with how to make healthier desserts. But these are good sources. Pureed prunes are a great source of fiber. They're probably limited in where you might use them, because you would want to use them in a dessert that has a darker base. So you wouldn't use it in something that's a white cake like that yogurt cake, but you might use it in a richer tasting dessert that contained chocolate, for instance. Or I can recall a long time ago, my mother used to make a prune cake of all things. So those can be made in cakes that are a darker color. When it comes to sugar, though, this is where perhaps a lot of us have the biggest problem, because we have our sweet tooths, or we have our spouses who have sweet tooths, and we're looking for how we reduce that in a healthy way. And my first recommendation out of the box is to first start with trying to do a sugar cleanse for yourself or your loved one. And that starts by taking maybe a 2-week break from all things sweet. And that sounds like a lot, but in 2 short weeks, you can kind of dramatically shift your taste buds reception to sugar. And I speak from experience on that. I did that many years ago, and the result has been actually very long lasting. Stepped away from sugar like that, and then tried things afterward, and found that normal sugar levels from before were way too sweet for me. So it became very easy for me to use this strategy: 1/3 to 1/2 less sugar in any recipe that I use. And I like to say that really, when I go to the coffee shop and I order one of those foo-foo coffees, I splurge on a vanilla latte. I always say, well, you make that half sweet for me, because I can't really tolerate a full sweet drink at this point. And if you give it a try, you may find the same thing works for you as well. So a lot of people say to me, well, what about sugars like maple syrup and honey and agave and molasses? Aren't they better for us because, they're not white sugar? It is true that white sugar has zero nutritional value. You don't get one benefit from that white sugar. It's all empty calories. And when you use a natural sugar like those I mentioned, or coconut sugar, palm sugar, you are getting a smidgen of nutritional value. There are some vitamins and minerals in things like maple syrup and so on. So you get a little bit of that. It's a notch above white table sugar, but it is sugar. And it still does, it is still a simple carbohydrate, which still impacts our pancreas and our insulin response. And so you want to be aware of that. We all want to avoid type 2 diabetes. So where do you go from there if you're trying to minimize those? And I'm not suggesting you eliminate them entirely, but again, the strategy is to decrease the amount, and you can do some replacement or some substitution. So how many of you have heard of sugar alcohols or these particular products, erythritol or xylitol? No. So those look like chemical names. They actually are not. They are, sugar alcohols are a natural substance that does not get digested the way that sugar does in our system. It passes through our system.
Yes, and it causing some diarrhea for some people. I was taking it and I had diarrhea.
Yes, that's I was going to just say that. Which one were you using, Tatiana?
Xylitol.
Xylitol.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so what she is referring to is that because these pass through our system and are not digested, they can have a digestive effect on us. But that is all very individual. So you would need to test these things. Now, I have found that different ones have a different effect on me. And I have also researched and found that erythritol is the one that has the least effect on most people. And so what Tatiana described could be a more severe response, but that's also related to how much of it that you consume. I'd say with these, they're not dangerous. They're not dangerous at all. They just give you, it's kind of like when you eat beans and you have gastro response to beans. That can happen with this. And so you try little amounts of it at a time and you try different types to see what works best for you. And you can start by using half and half and work it in. Usually as your system gets adjusted, those symptoms decrease. And erythritol has the least of those and also tastes the most like sugar. There's
Yeah.
also
I've used those. I noticed that they use the sugar alcohols a lot in the ice cream, reduce carbs for ice cream. And
Mhm.
yes, I have had kind of a not acceptable, I guess, for my body with one of them, and I can't remember which one, but I'll just try to stay away from that one.
It would
But
be
in ice
interesting.
creams that I noticed it.
It would be interesting to know what kind and try to pinpoint which one of those.
I will.
And
I'll
just
do that
keep
next
trying
time.
some others. There's another one out, and you might write this down because I haven't done so much research on this, so I didn't include it. It's new to me. It's called allulose, and that seems to be even more preferred. And I'll go ahead and put that in the chat box.
Are you spelling that?
Yeah, I'm going to put that in the chat so that you
Okay.
have that. Can't see. Allulose. I believe that's correct.
Okay.
All right, and I see somebody has a question while I'm here. I know this is a class about dessert, but in regards to reducing fat, what do you think about using air fryers? Can we talk about that a little bit at the end? Okay. So those are sugar alcohols. Allulose is another kind. They are often blended with other things to help them to be equivalent in the way that they're measured with table sugar. And oftentimes they're blended with stevia. How many of you use stevia?
I use stevia.
Okay. So stevia is an herb much like a tea, and you can actually grow it. You can take it off the stems, you can dry it, you can powder it in a coffee grinder, and you can put it into your tea, or you can measure it into your desserts. What you will see at the grocery store is processed stevia, which is white, not green. And it's often processed either on its own or with a little bit of sugar alcohol. And so that's a nice blend, actually. And the final kind of sugar that you can use, which is a sugar but not recognized by our system like a white sugar, and therefore doesn't get digested, is monk fruit sweetener. So a monk fruit is an actual fruit, and the sugar substance in the monk fruit is extracted as a sugar substitute. And again, it doesn't provide any calories. None of these provide any calories. There's negligible ones here in the sugar alcohol, and we'll see that. So these are
Deb,
yes.
what kind of form does the monk fruit come in?
So that's what I'm going to show you right here. Here's what a product will look like. So these are some of the things you'll see with those substances that have been combined and are for sale out in the grocery store. Swerve is probably the first one I tried. It has erythritol and something called oligosaccharides. Those are completely natural prebiotic molecules. So there's nothing bad about those. These things are all processed. So having said that, that's the downside, but that's what makes them easy to use and incorporate into recipes. Tatiana, I see you have your hand raised.
I don't, I'm writing everything down.
Okay,
Thank you. I
You're
just
welcome.
want to mention about stevia. For me, it's very bitter. I couldn't figure out how to, what is the proportion for me to make not so bitter. That's all. Thank
Yeah,
you.
well, stevia is actually, and it comes from incidentally, comes from, it's a chrysanthemum. It's in the chrysanthemum family, by the way. And it is 200 to 300 times sweeter than sugar. So that's why it has that very intense taste. Plus it isn't sugar, it is a different substance. But one of the things that sort of helps with that is to blend it with these sugar alcohols. And that's what they're doing. They're finding that that's much more tolerable when it's blended with something else that kind of takes the edge off that bitterness. Monk fruit sweetener is also blended with erythritol. And this Lakanto is a brand that is pretty popular. Again, we're starting to see these more mainstream in grocery stores, but you can typically find them in the organic section of your grocer, if not in the regular sugar aisle, and they'll be in health food stores. And then this last one is the one that I'm most currently using because I found it at the grocery outlet for $3.99 a bag. And I like how it tastes like sugar to me. And it's an erythritol stevia blend. And it comes in powdered and in granulated white version. Questions or thoughts about any of these?
Yes, Deb, what about the stevia extract? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's all just another form of it. And that's actually a very pure form. So that's great. And if you wanted to, you could experiment with using drops of that in your dessert. I just wouldn't know how to convert that to any of these recipes right now. It would be sort of a testing for you, which is not that hard to do. You test your batter, and when it's as sweet as you want it, try it. So here we go. We're going to quickly go through some of these because I realize it's 1:15. We've answered a lot of questions. Avocado flourless brownies. I love these. They are also good if you're on a keto diet, a paleo diet, or a dairy-free diet. I mean, what could be better? You've got lots of options here. And they are really, as you can see, very fudgy, very chocolatey. I won't go into the whole article here, but you will want to read the article because she talks about how she landed on the amount of avocado and the amount of cocoa, because you don't want the avocado to be the most present feature in this dessert. You want the chocolate to be forward. So she'll talk about all of that. And I want to just scroll down here to the recipe. It's very easy to make. And it calls for eggs and 3/4 of a cup of avocado. She's specific about that. Medium and ripe is not good enough. You need 3/4 of a cup. And then a 1/4 cup of melted ghee. So that could be butter. Melted ghee is a version of butter. It's clarified butter. Remember, you used to get that if you got lobster, you get clarified butter, which is just removal of protein from butter. So it doesn't burn. It's just the pure fat. But you could use coconut oil. You can see she's not really too worried about having saturated fat in her brownies. So you could experiment with some of those other fat replacements that we talked about, but not any of these recipes include all of those options. So that would be experimenting on your part. And then for additional fat, some unsalted nut butter. And that's a very good, healthy addition because we're now including omega-3 fatty acids that come from fats. And so here's an example of not just making it less bad, but more nutritious. As well with the avocado. Did you know that avocado has, in a half of an avocado, 5 grams of fiber? And it's not always easy to get our daily allotment of 25 grams of fiber. So this is a good way to add some fiber. And then baking soda, salt, and then she uses the Lakanto sweetener, but you could use any of those sweeteners that we talked about. And 1/3 of a cup of cacao powder. If you don't have cacao powder, I used cocoa powder, so that's a fine substitute. A little bit of vanilla extract. If you like this to be a little more chewy, you can add some gelatin. I did not. I loved them the way they were. This calls for a half cup of low carb chocolate chips or chopped up chocolate. And that's as a topping. Now, this is my little tip, I guess. You can do that. I didn't want the extra calories, so I didn't add those, and they were plenty fudgy enough for me. Sometimes I just stop myself and say, well, do I need that extra little thing? Or can I save a few calories? So they're so easy to make. They're baked at 350, and what you do is line a pan with parchment paper. This says a loaf pan. I used an 8x8 pan, and you're going to cut this into 8 squares. So 1 square is a serving. And all you do is put all of the ingredients into a food processor and let it do its thing until you don't over mix it, but you do want to make sure that the avocado has been blended in. You don't want to bite into a chunk of avocado at the end of the baking period. That would not be a pleasant experience when you're expecting chocolate. So bake it for 25 minutes and then pull it out, let it cool for 15 minutes before you pull it out, and then just put it on your cutting board and you're into 8 squares. And when it comes to sugar alcohols, there's the sugar alcohol calories, 4.5. And I still don't think that they really go through your system the way sugar does. Carbohydrates 10. The fat is still fairly high, but remember putting really good fats in there for a lot of that with the nut butter. And 152 calories. So these get 2 thumbs up from people who've come back to my classes and said they've made them. How many of you like pecan pie? Anybody like pecan pie? Yeah. Could we pick a worse dessert? Well, maybe cheesecake, but pecan pie is corn syrup, lots of butter. You know, it's just so sweet. And every time I take a bite of pecan pie, I feel guilty. So here's a conversion. Now, I won't say this is 100% healthiest, but it's way better. So if you're craving a pecan pie, this might be a good substitute for you. And it has the added benefit of being vegan. So if you have a person in your friendship circle or your family who's a vegan, you can serve this and feel good about it. It looks like the real thing, right? So, by the way, this is Chocolate Covered Katie. She has a great website. So when you get this link in my email, you might want to explore her site for some other recipes. Okay, and here we go. I'm not going to go into all the details of making it, but just the ingredients here. We're looking at chopped pecans. So we have healthy fats and nuts, and we're using blackstrap molasses or regular molasses, and then another form of sugar. So here we're using the natural sugars instead of the white sugar. So again, sugar is sugar, but there is some improvement here. And I used the blackstrap and the maple syrup because that to me gave that really deep, rich, complex flavor. And some nut butter like we used in the other recipe. And what makes this recipe vegan is the flax meal. Because what we're making here, how many of you have ever made flax eggs or used flax eggs in a recipe? So you know what flax seeds are, right? Flax seeds, the little brown seeds. And if you buy the meal that they're already ground, you have flax meal, or you can grind your own in your coffee grinder. If you take a 1/4 cup of that and whisk it into 1/3 cup of water, as it sits, it will get thick. Like, you know how eggs get viscous when we mix them into a pie. That's what will happen with the flax meal. So you get some nice omega-3 fatty acids and fiber from the flax meal, and it makes it a vegan recipe as well. And a little more water or bourbon. Again, I didn't go for the calories. I went for the water, some vanilla extract, a little bit of salt. And then these are optional garnishes, which, as I mentioned, I'm not really into the optional garnishes, but you can certainly do that. And the way that you can use a homemade or a store-bought crust. She made a homemade one here, and so you can look at her recipe for that using whole wheat flour. This is a press in the pan crust, so it's really easy. You don't have to worry about how hard it would be to roll it out. And I'm going to give you an option for a lower calorie, healthy crust that's made from oatmeal. So that will come in your email as well. That's what I used because I thought that the oatmeal was a little bit nutty and kind of worked well with the pecans. So you're just whisking all the ingredients for the pie together and then putting it in the refrigerator for a little while, about 30 minutes before you put it into the pie crust. And then you bake it at 350 for about 35 minutes. And you turn your oven off and let it sit in the oven for another 10, and it's finished.
I have a quick question. If I don't have molasses, is it okay not to use it, or can I substitute molasses for something different?
Yes, you can substitute. So you can substitute any of these. You can substitute regular molasses, pure maple. You can just make the rest of it maple syrup if you like.
Maple syrup, excellent.
Or the honey or the agave. Who's saying that?
My husband.
Oh, okay. And Carter, I see you have your hand up. Carter?
If you have
Not anymore. Sorry to pass that. I was just indicating pecan pie is one of my favorites.
Okay, okay, good.
I'll check that. I didn't mean to have it up anymore.
No, that's okay, no problem. So that is, that's the pecan pie. And I think that while it wasn't 100% what I was used to, I would easily eat that again, especially when I know that a typical pecan pie has a typical piece of pecan pie has 588 calories, 7.5 grams of saturated fat. And you can be looking at what we have here compared to 2.1 and 351 calories. It has, get this, 42 grams of sugar compared to 18.9 and 83 grams of carbohydrates compared to 42 here. So it's substantially better if you're having a pecan pie craving. All right, so I want to spend this last amount of time. I'm going to include these last two recipes for you. This one uses chickpeas, canned chickpeas that you're going to drain and blend as well. And you're making them very similarly to the way that we made the brownies. It just uses the chickpeas instead of flour. And it's not a chickpea flour, it's canned chickpeas. You can buy chickpea flour and use that for other things, but this does not call for the flour. This one, what I would say about it, uses white flour. You can also use spelt flour in here. And it's a citrusy, nuanced taste. So it's fruity, and I like what they do to bring out another flavor here. In the recipe, they heat a couple of tablespoons of a jam that would be that would go along with it, a citrus jam or something like that, just until it's warm enough that you can brush it over the top. So you might not even use all of it, but it's enough to give you that flavor without adding a lot of sugar calories. So you can think about that as a technique to use with other desserts that you make to provide the flavor, but not necessarily the additional calories. But I do want to take this time to, since several of you said cheesecake, and one of you in particular said pumpkin cheesecake, to talk about this no-bake pumpkin cheesecake. It's in a glass, but I think you might like it. It's so easy to make. I don't know about you, but when I make those cheesecakes, they're a big production. When I make a big cheesecake in the springform pan, and sometimes they crack, and they're also super high calorie. In fact, the Cheesecake Factory original cheesecake is 830 calories per slice, 157 carbs,
Mhm.
51 grams of sugar, and 37 grams of saturated fat. So keep that in mind when I'm going through this with you, because you might just find that you're willing to compromise a little bit for this. I like this recipe. The picture that I showed in the front is the one that I made. And I actually had the glasses in a little carrier. I took them to a friend's house and served them as dessert. They were easy to make. They were really light. They weren't too filling after a full meal. And everybody who ate them loved them. So it was 2 thumbs up from my standpoint anyway. And they couldn't be easier to make. The crust is graham crackers supplemented with some pecans and a little bit of cinnamon. So what you're doing is grinding them up in your food processor and setting them aside. I always take a little bit out for the topping on each of these glasses so that I don't use them all in my base at the bottom of my glass for my crust. I don't want to forget. So take a little bit out and set it aside. And your filling is reduced fat cream cheese, non-fat, plain Greek yogurt. Now, not regular yogurt. You want the thicker yogurt because Greek yogurt's been drained additionally, and that's what makes it thicker. And then a cup of pumpkin puree or just canned pumpkin. You can do your own if you have it, or you can just buy the can. And then pumpkin pie spice. If you don't have it, there's a recipe here for blending it, or you can use what you like. So I like a little bit of cinnamon and a little bit of clove. If I don't have a spice blend put together, I'll just make my own as I go and add it in there to taste. Yes, Juanita, you have a question? Oh, Juanita, your microphone, take your microphone off again. Yours was flashing back and forth. I don't know what was happening there, Juanita.
Okay, could you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Do you have to use pecan? We have family members that are allergic to all forms of nuts.
All forms of nuts. I'd probably just leave those out then. And you could use a little bit extra graham cracker if you wanted to.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pumpkin pie spice, vanilla extract, and 6 tablespoons of maple syrup. So this is 6 tablespoons of maple syrup that goes across 8 servings. So pretty low in terms of sugar. If you wanted to make this totally sugar-free, you could use one of those sugar substitutes that we talked about. And you just mix all of that up with your mixer, those ingredients for the filling with your standing mixer or your hand mixer. You beat it until it's nice and fluffy all together and put it in the refrigerator to chill for about 30 minutes. And then all I did was take those crumbs and put them evenly divide them among the glasses. You're not trying to tamp them down or anything like that. You want them in the glass and then just divide the filling across all the glasses. You can make your own whipped cream if you like, but I just bought the canned whipped cream. It's very low in calories. It's very low in sugar. I think it's a nice splurge. And then on top, I just sprinkled those crumbs. So I do that before I serve it, just because the whipped cream won't wilt then. And look at the calories on it. You could eat this any night of the week, 214 calories. And there's only 16 sugars in this, and less if you use a blend of the sugar alcohols and maple syrup. You can do that as well. The saturated fat is only 2.9. So I think that hands down, this one for me really is my favorite of all the desserts that I show here, although I love all of them and have made them all. So that's my take on healthy desserts for today. And I'm really so glad that you joined me. We talked about quite a bit and covered a lot on how to make replacements for unhealthy ingredients in desserts. And I would just invite you to ask any additional questions that you have, or even make some other comments or some other tips right now. Anyone have anything that they'd like to say or add?
I have a question again.
Sure.
Sorry to be a pest.
You're not.
If you can go back for us, when you talked about a 2-week cleanse for anything sweet, are you also including in that cleanse, no fruit, because if you eat oranges or apple or banana, that has sweet in it.
Yep.
Are you talking about adding refined sugar?
I'm talking about anything that tastes sweet to you. I would remove anything that's got any sugar for a couple of weeks.
Ow.
Yeah, I know. Well, at least give it a week. Try that. I'm not doing this from any kind of I'm not a doctor. I'm not a
Yeah, no,
nutritionist,
no, I
but
understand.
I do know that that is something that can work. And somebody was in one of these classes and said they did the same thing with salt. So it
Ah.
really is, it's really anything like that, that you feel that you've got a bit of an addiction to,
Mhm.
quote unquote addiction to, that you just remove it until your system, we can adjust to anything.
Yeah,
But we have to give our bodies enough time to do that. So that would be my
well, thank you.
suggestion on that. So
Um,
thank you for coming.
Deb, could you answer the question about the air fryer? Your
Uh,
take on the
Yeah, air fry. Yes, I keep doing research on air fryers, and I think I have now gotten myself to a place where I feel good about air fryers and comfortable with them. I think they're great for the oil. My only concern was cooking things at such a high temperature. There's a substance called it's a carcinogen, and the word acrylides. Acrylides can be produced under high temperature, but what I have satisfied myself with is that is for mostly vegetables. And so I just feel fine about using an air fryer at this point, and might buy one for myself. So yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
We use it a lot.
Great. Oh, that's great. Well, sometime we'll have to talk about that, because I think it would be fun to do a class on air fryers and recipes. But first I have to buy one, unless one of you wants to teach a class, Ivy.
Oh.
Okay.
I should be able to.
Yeah, you probably could. I know I've kept you over, so I'm really anxious to make sure that you can leave and not feel awkward about doing that. So feel free to do it, and I'll send you this email. Please give us some feedback. There's a feedback link, very important to us, and I would be very grateful if you would. I hope you enjoyed the class and that you come back for some of my other classes.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
You.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. I hope that those of you who are new come on back.
Oh, I plan to.
Great. Fantastic. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.